I'm Sarah Anderson with the Institute for Policy Studies, and I'm really excited to be moderating this session on reaching rural communities through powerful relational organizing. And since this is part of the Henry Wallace Symposium, I wanted to point out that Henry Wallace might be best remembered as FDR's vice president during World War II. But before that, he was FDR's agriculture secretary during the Great Depression, the worst crisis for rural America in our history. And he designed a lot of the New Deal programs that helped get farming communities out of that crisis and protected family farms like the one I grew up on in Minnesota. And today, though, rural communities are in crisis again. With corporate monopolies squeezing small producers and with the hollowing out of manufacturing. In my hometown's Main Street, a lot of the former stores and restaurants are now social service agencies and food banks to serve the poor. And I think it's that way in a lot of small towns across America. So we're really lucky today to have someone who can speak about how to turn around things in rural America. Kate Hess Pace, she is our Wallace Rural Organizing Fellow. She's someone who grew up in a small town like I did, and like so many others, and like myself and so many others from small towns, she left for the bright lights of the big city for a while. But then, unlike me, she returned to her hometown and her home area in Indiana, where she says her family has lived for longer than anyone can remember. And Kate founded Hoosier Action in 2017 to improve the lives of working families in Indiana. She's worked in organizing and advocacy for the past 20 years, developing the leadership of people who've been left out of public decision-making. Prior to moving back home to Indiana, she worked as a faith-based organizer with Isaiah in Minnesota, working on predatory lending and foreclosure defense. And she describes herself as a fierce evangelist for the stunning beauty of Southern Indiana and a deep believer in the strength of our people. Please welcome Kate Hess Pace.
All right, good afternoon. So I'm the director and founder of Hoosier Action. I don't spend most of my time in rooms like this, and it truly is a pleasure to be with all of you. I find my way to organizing as a firm and deep believer in human beings and their inherent dignity and worth, and the belief that our world and society gets better with more participation and more leadership, particularly with those that have been left behind. Hoosier Action is a membership organization, and so I stand here representing our people. Our people are all in small towns and rural areas in southern Indiana. They live across the political spectrum. They are brilliant, they are hilarious, and they are shouldering more than they should. And their lives are harder than they have to be. So I organized in Minnesota for about 10 years, and I would come home to Indiana and be like, what do you join if your water is poisoned? What do you do? And watching, so where I'm from, by the time I finished high school, every factory in town had closed. We cut limestone, we stopped cutting limestone, we had an RCA plant. Several of my best friends' dads lost their jobs there. You saw people plunge into unemployment. And so a lot of our small towns where we don't have tourism have been shuttered. They've turned into places of liquor stores and payday stores and not vibrant economies. So I'd come back and be like, somebody needs to do something. Like, I've seen the power of organizing, and it can't just sit in cities across the country. I know how much our people in Indiana both want to fight back and want to be a part of something and have no invitation to do it. So I moved back in April of 2017. I'm going to leave lots of time for questions because I'd prefer to interact with you than talk at you. So I moved back in 2017, and I had really been trained on a very rigorous and robust methodology of organizing. And that methodology, a lot of it I brought with me, but realized really quickly that it rested on top of a democracy that we did not have in Southern Indiana. So we don't have contested elections in most of our general elections. We don't have an active press that reports on what you're doing. We don't have partnerships where we can build a coalition in the ecosystem. So we had to back up our organizing to think about what is it going to take to create spaces and places that are legible to people and onboard them towards political leadership. The other thing we found was that our politics and people's orientation to it had been entirely nationalized. So people could talk a lot about the president, and they would. They could talk a lot about what Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing or Jamie Raskin, but they had no idea what was happening in our state house, no idea how the county commissioners just voted. And I think about it like a Jenga game where the bottom has been totally hollowed out. And here we are with pretty broken politics and no on-ramps for people at the bottom to participate, to shape, to have any collective meaning about why did the economy drop out where you live. So we put a ban on talking about national politics, and we don't care who you voted for. What we care about is you and your lives and what's hard, and can we knit something together to actually change the material conditions of where you are. And the other thing that we found, and I think this is true for you too, is that everybody's muscle of working together and doing things in community was pretty atrophied. So how do we get people better at the imperfect, tension-filled work of we're gonna sit together and figure out how do we protect pregnant workers on the job? How do we get your wages higher? How do we get this site cleaned up that's polluting your entire town? So we set out to do that, and today we have chapters in 13 counties. Our chapters represent different constituencies. So we have a chapter focused just on maternal health. I was just talking to somebody from Indiana, and 1 in 3 counties doesn't have an OBGYN. We're looking at this bill and seeing somewhere between 8 to 16 rural hospitals close. So how do we continue to make sure that people can both have healthy births and then have services and activities after that birth? We have Care Not Cuffs chapter, which is one of my favorite and most boisterous chapters, and that is all people who are formerly incarcerated in long-term recovery. We're an area that was hit significantly hard by the opioid crisis. And so they just recently passed, it was a felony to test your drugs for fentanyl, and so we got our state legislature to decriminalize fentanyl testing strips and reducing the amount of overdoses in our community. We've also made sure that all first responders are equipped with Narcan, and making sure that those stories of people that have been incarcerated or struggling with the opioid or addiction are front and center, have public sympathy, and we're moving towards that as a public health crisis, not a criminalization effort. We have Clark County moms, which is all working class moms. Most of their kids have IEPs on 504s, so they're trying to make it through the school system with significant challenges. So they've been trying to figure out both how do we fund our public schools, but how do we make sure our kids are taken care of? And that chapter includes people from deeply enmeshed in QAnon to very progressive Democrats, and they figured that together, actually all of us want our kids safe and taken care of. So our chapters range quite a bit, and we figured out how do they both have their own identity and their nucleus as a chapter, but we're able to bring all of them together into one organization. I often put this slide up because I like to remind people what is at the core of organizing, which is not me coming to you and saying we're going to run this campaign. And in a place like Indiana, we don't have enough people that would just naturally gravitate towards being a part of a statewide campaign. So we start with courageous and curious listening about what's happening in your life, and then ask people, do you want to do something about it? So we're not advocating on behalf of other people, but instead inviting them to join us to be a part of change. And when you move people from being victims of circumstance over and over, and when you stay in that place, you stay in a place of blame, of resentment, of powerlessness, of fear, of hopelessness. But if we move people towards actually, you can bring this to your city council, you can bring this to your capital, And you're actually not going to get stuck in being a victim, but you're going to be a part of powerful change across our state. It is transformative and has dividends far beyond any policy bill or election. Okay. So what I've come to in Hoosier Action, and I know that we are facing and staring down some of the most daunting challenges we've ever faced. I know that there is vast suffering where I live and where you live too. And it can feel like there won't be one silver bullet, and it can feel like no solution is big enough. And what I came to with Hoosier Action is actually what we need is a lot more things lower to the ground that people can join and be a part of, that they don't feel like politics isn't about me and it's about people yelling at each other in DC. And instead animating towards politics is about you and me and where we live. And democracy happens where we live. And you're invited to be a part of it. I don't see a world where we get to the real change we need where we don't have the majority of the country in our imperfect political homes that they're shaping, building, and belonging to. So that's what we've committed to do, and we had to figure out, like, what is the model that's going to do this? Because we can't actually just go inviting people to sign petitions. So we worked with our membership for a long time to figure out these 3 pillars of this is what has to be in place for us to be a durable political home in Indiana. The first pillar is church. We are a secular organization, though I would say vast majority of membership is deeply connected to their faith. But when we say church, what we're talking about filling in is the gap of institutional collapse that's happened, where when my grandparents were active members of their church, they were parts of like multiple clubs and civics institutions. Those institutions both created meaning for people and brought them into like real public action, days of volunteering. So our church part is like, how do we really become a place that you can walk into and your values are reflected and we're going to make meaning and everybody is welcome. The second piece is bomb shelter, which is really like so many of our people don't have enough of a floor underneath them to participate in politics. So how do we incorporate mutual aid into our work? And then, like, how do we make sure people have the information they need to be as powerful as possible? And how are we preparing for a future where we're seeing ongoing crises and becoming the place that people can go and be safe inside of? And the third piece is more of the traditional community organizing piece, which is training, campaigns, a commitment to agitation, a commitment that you're the one that's going to be a part of leading this and you're going to go find more people around you. I'll go a little bit deeper into this. So this is our moms, like a couple members of our moms chapter. They came to me, they were like, we want to start doing more art stuff. And I was like, okay, try it. So their opening meetings are often like, come and paint a pumpkin and bring your kid. And all kinds of moms come in and they just sit and paint their pumpkin and talk about what it's like to be a mom. There's a lot of complaining. There's like a lot of lifting up about things that are hard, big and small, but also just like a space to connect and a space to be affirmed. We decided that as part of our church pillar, like we were gonna buy property and become like a visible part of the community. So we bought a couple buildings, one so people would have a space to walk into so that we would be recognized in the community, but also have been able to do things like on the side of this building, Care Not Cuffs is building out a memorial garden for all the lives lost to overdose and suicide in our community, where there has been very little public recognition of how much loss there is. And so it's both about meeting people's emotional and spiritual needs, but doing that in public so it's seen, and we're moving people away from just privatized pain and grief towards public recognition of your life matters, the lives that were lost matters, and things could be better if we work together and change the laws. We also did some things to just bake in rituals. So our chapters look really different, different kinds of people in them. We want members to have a lot of freedom to shape them, but how can we make sure that everybody is doing some of the same things? So if you walk into a Care Not Cuffs meeting or a mom's chapter, you know that you're in a Hoosier Action chapter, and when every quarter we bring the whole base together, people can have the same language and talk to each other. So with our members, we built out 12 axioms. We read them at the beginning of every meeting, and maybe it is from coming out of faith-based organizing, but I was like, I want a thing that we always return to that reminds us of who we are and what we're doing. And those just from, I think they're on our website too, but just reminding people that we believe that people are at the center of our work. Every human deserves to live a life of dignity. We get to determine what's possible. And our work calls us to choose change over comfort. And we talk through those. We have tension-filled conversation about those. And we remind each other of both what we owe each other and the work that we're doing together. The second is bomb shelter, and sometimes for this means lots and lots of know your rights trainings. You don't have a lot of rights as a renter or a worker in Indiana, but we want to make sure people are equipped. We do know your rights on medical debt. We've done medical debt workshops. We always feed people. We always have childcare. And then with our building, we're working to turn it into a resilience hub. So as the weather gets more and more extreme, we can actually be ready to respond through crises. This past summer was the hottest summer on record. It probably was here too. And where we lived, there was no cooling centers at all. There was no place to go. And so we worked with 14 congregations to open cooling centers. They're open again this year, and figuring out both how to build trust with the community, but also just committing ourselves that both our power building is also about keeping people safe and secure. And this campaign now with the clergy and the environmental resilience group that's been working on it is now pushing on the town we live in to get actual cooling centers open and to make sure we have plans in place. So in a year like this, where we had the third worst snowstorm on record, we had twice the level of storms and tornadoes that we've ever had, and now we're having the hottest summer on record, trying to get city and state officials to partner with us to just make sure people are safe. And the third piece of our plan is Vanguard, sometimes a revolutionary vanguard, depending on where we are. This is a meeting in Austin, Indiana. Austin is about a town of 4,000 people. Austin, when Governor Pence was there, he shuttered most of the Planned Parenthoods, and Austin, Indiana had the worst rural HIV crisis that I believe has ever happened in this country. Austin, Indiana, with my Republican rep, then moved and fought the state to get the first needle exchanges open. These are people that have been fighting really hard for harm reduction, completely hit by the opioid crisis. And part of our programming is that in most of these towns, there are no town halls to meet the people that are running for office where you live. So this was a town hall where we had Republicans, Libertarians, and Democrat candidates there. Our members get to ask their questions about their values. They actually get to participate. We've seen lots of people switch who they support by just having that experience of getting to ask questions and see what people stand for. But we live in a place where this is a very rare thing, especially in smaller towns and areas. And part of this is also really, really committing with our people to build independent political power. And that doesn't mean we're trying to build a new party, but that in our state where we live, we do not see the parties responding to the needs and concerns of working class people, and we want to have enough power inside of our membership to push on either party. Because what has happened in Indiana is that if you want to live somewhere that has amenities and has resources, it will likely be blue and it will likely be completely unaffordable. The county I live in is purple, one of the very few purple counties. The mayor of my town is a Democrat. The choices that he's making has been to put $500,000 towards a mountain bike trail, while we have a list of hundreds waiting for Section 8. For the last month, I've had a mom and a son sleeping in their car in our parking lot because they cannot find housing. So part of the push that we're trying to make is a large enough block of working class people and working class voters that either party will start to be more and more accountable to, and to start to redefine what politics is with regular people at the center of it. Well, thanks. All right, so this was our last quarterly meeting. We've been launching this neighbor to neighbor program since the beginning of the year. This is Knock Your Block. We've got more members knocking their roads and blocks than we ever have. And it really started with we have to get the deepest, densest network of people around us, whether it is climate or AI or authoritarianism. The way we're going to get through it is together. So we're going out and we're actually neighborhoods, neighbor to neighbor are just making emergency contact lists. Who in your neighborhood is vulnerable? What elderly people are you going to check in on if the power goes out? Who needs diapers, etc. And then asking people like if they want to join us on working on this long term. I feel like I was going to say one more thing about that, but anyway. So I'm going to leave you with this and then actually really want to have a conversation. I was really happy to see Knock Your Block go, and it feels like an odd and non-traditional community organizing campaign because there isn't a campaign at the center of it. But really what it is that we want to make sure our politics is driven by the people that live where we live and about our growing our capacity to be in relationship with each other even when we disagree. And what I haven't seen in this country is enough politics driven from places like where I'm from. So how do we get our moms, our members, our formerly incarcerated people at the center of both politics in Indiana? And then how can this be more of a model so that we have the Nebraskas and the Kansas and the Alabamas as real full participants in the project we're all trying to work on? I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, and then we're going to have a discussion. Thank you.
And Karina, my colleague, I think is handing out some note cards for questions, but wow, they're piling up already. This is great. So I will just dive in, but gosh, it's so great to learn from your wisdom of working on the ground there in Indiana. One of the questions I got is, how do you deal with the dominance of Fox News and right-wing media and just generally media disinformation?
I'm going to say a couple different things about that. Most people aren't that political. They just aren't. Like, there's a whole set of people on the polls that already have their political ideology they don't gravitate to my organization, and that's not who we exist for. So I would say like the most of our people are kind of a mess of values. We live in a conservative area. They've been rained on by lots of ideas, but they're not necessarily like watching Fox News every day. They're mostly trying to like work 2 jobs and get their kids out the door and deal with life. So misinformation is a little bit more of a thing, and we take it head on. And where people grow and change is in trusted relationship. So the more we have that with people, the more we can move them forward to like a more full worldview that includes a whole diversity of people inside of it. And the more we focus on people getting a material floor underneath them, the more their capacity to have that worldview grows.
That's great. Here's a nice one. Your work is so powerful and beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with us. Can you share about your journey in getting funding and resources for Hoosier Action and your work?
Sure. A couple things. It helped that I had organized for 10 years before in the Twin Cities, so I came with a lot of relationships. I think a lot about how hard this would have been if I had just been in Indiana, and I want to figure out how we can equip the amazing, talented people in places like where I live without them having to leave first. So I did come with a set of relationships. I will say, when I decided to move back to Indiana, multiple people said to me, I just want you to know, Kate, nobody gives a shit about Indiana. So that's like true, and that's always been true. And I also heard a lot of like, you can't organize those people, and both of them like firmly ignored. And it's also, we have a much lower cost of living, things are cheaper, so I didn't need that. I needed enough money to get off the ground. I did 13 house parties, I moved down with $12,000, so not a lot. And then mostly have been like trying to figure out like our members pay dues, we have individual donors, and then I work very hard to make sure we get grants that actually are connected to our members' interest and not pulling them away from our interests. So that takes more work too, because there's a lot of philanthropy that wants to tell us what to do instead of figuring out, like, actually what our moms want right now is to go after Meta, that's building a data center in their town that got a $6 billion tax break while the schools are getting gutted. I don't know if we'll get money for that, but that's where my accountability sits. So I'm trying to find money all the time that is going back to the thing that they want to do.
That's great. We've heard a few times throughout the day about the problems of corporate monopolies, and that was an issue that Henry Wallace actually was passionate about as well. And one of the questions has to do with, has Hoosier Action dealt at all with the need for stronger antitrust enforcement in agriculture?
We have not. We have not dealt with that.
In your area, is there much of a farming community left?
There's a little bit. A lot of our family farms have turned into large-scale corporate farms, right. But there is some. We started for a while doing a food and farms coalition. I would love to rebuild that. I will say, like, our base is increasingly uncomfortable with, like, how dependent we are on these global networks while we live in a place that should be able to grow its own food. And, like, I would say across political ideology, like, really actually want more access to that. But we've yet to run a campaign around food and farms.
Great. This one is, while encouraging people to become agents of change in their communities, how do you also help them avoid getting painted into meaningless corners or getting outmaneuvered by experienced opponents? I know you've gone up against some big opponents.
Who asked that question? Oh, you want to say more about it?
Well, I just think that your organization appears to be doing a terrific job bringing people together, giving them a voice. Mm-hmm. But then how do you avoid just kind of dumping them into the political arena where they get outmaneuvered and outfoxed by wily, experienced, endowed opponents?
Okay, well, first I would say our membership is smarter than our opponents. That doesn't mean they don't need training and they don't need pushing and they don't need people to walk with them. But in the small towns that we're operating in, my membership is sharp. Now, that is where organizing training comes in. And I didn't really talk about power, but our entire orientation is we win when we have enough power to win. So how do we get the power to win? And so it's both like we train people on how do you run a power analysis. Right now, we're trying to move. I think there's like 9 people on one city council. We know we have to get 7 to override the mayor. So how are we going to get that 7? We do a power analysis on every 7 of those city council people. What do they care about? What do you have that they want? And what are you going to do to be in relationship with them? The thing that is weirder about where I am is that kind of activity of community participation in politics doesn't exist in Bloomington a little bit, right? So it doesn't exist. So actually what we find is that people are confused and hostile to just basic participation of community members. And that is often like what we're trying to get people, the hump we're trying to get over is like actually, even if they're a well-meaning public servant, you're not used to community members being like, actually, we want to have coffee with you and we're going to do it again. And we have a set of things we want from you and we believe you work for us. We have a lot, and this is on both sides of the aisle, of small amounts of old boys networks that kind of like want to do what they want to do and pass money out to their friends. I don't know if that helped, but yeah.
This one that resonates with me in my hometown. The local newspaper shut down 5 years ago. Mine shut down in the last year. Wondering if this reality has posed challenges in your work with Hoosier Action and what methods you have for addressing the lack of outlets for community news, connections, etc.
It's a big deal. One of our chapters I didn't talk about, and I wish I would have, is pretty new, and a member just wrote me the day before yesterday. It's called the Transparency and Accountability Chapter. And actually, their main thing is they train people to go to city and county council meetings, take notes, and report out. And so we're trying to figure out how to make that even bigger and more public. That's where I had a set of members being like, they're using our opioid settlement money for surveillance. And they knew that money was not for surveillance. And so they've been able to like catch things, see things, and we're interested in like how do we make, and then they're running a campaign to just have more participation in the local budget process. But that kind of trust, it's both trust in government and then also having a local ecosystem of news. We can't fill all these gaps, but trying to figure out, like, how do we figure out ways that people can actually be like local journalists themselves, and what kind of shape does that need to take? There's a cool organization in Maine called Maine People's Alliance, and they built their own newspaper called The Beacon, and they actually run their own stories, tell their own stories, and like there's models like that that I'm interested in, because we're not going to get another daily newspaper in Martinsville or in a whole sets of places that I live.
This one's a little bit related, so I'll go to this one. This person said that on Tuesday, I attended an event where Representative Erin Huchin,
Yeah, that's my rep.
okay, spoke. I asked her what her views on funding PBS and NPR are. She gave a weird response saying she used Grok, Elon Musk's AI, and said public media was biased, too liberal, thus supported defunding. And this person is wondering, how important is PBS, NPR in your southern Indiana region?
I think I want to be careful because that's actually not a thing I've talked to my people about. So I don't know. Like, I could guess. I don't think there's like great NPR listenership in our base. I'm sure lots of them have used PBS, but I actually don't know. And it's not an issue that people bring to us, with the exception potentially of some of our membership in Bloomington.
Are you planning to organize your members and keep hospitals open, given the Medicaid cuts and all?
Great question. Okay. Yes. So during COVID, we, like all of you, spent our time online. It was a kind of a rough transition where we lost part of our base that just wasn't in the practice of getting online for meetings, and we had a new base that was more statewide. So we're picking up all of these people statewide. This is a long way to get to your question, but I'm going to get there. And we realized at some point, like, we're never going to get transformation in Indiana if we're just skimming the surface across the whole state and trying to figure out who agrees with us. And we could get like some numbers, but like that wasn't the path. So we pulled back and made like a real commitment to 13 counties, and we want to do like strong local work. That is what the majority of our organization has been committed to, with the exception of Medicaid. We've been fighting on Medicaid since we started. Worked really hard to get the work requirements taken off of our Medicaid program, the multi-pronged strategy that was both like lawsuits and sending lots of people to the Capitol. So Medicaid is the one, and every single one of our groups, from the moms group to it being the only path to recovery for a whole lots of our members, struggling with addiction, we will continue to fight on Medicaid. I think in Indiana, we're looking at somewhere between 9 and 16 rural hospitals closing. So that is a space where we do want to try to build up and down the state to figure out how do we fight back on that. So yes is the answer. It's the one place I want to grow to scale over depth.
There's so many interesting questions. In Colorado, on state issues, many times the voices of rural areas are overridden by more populated areas. Do you have that problem? And if yes, have you dealt with it? Or how have you dealt with it?
There's more power in the rural areas? Is that what it's saying?
No, the voices of rural areas are overridden by more populated areas.
Oh.
To do with a lot of state ballot issues, such as the recent reintroduction of wolves into Colorado. And of course, it's a state ballot issue, but most recently when wolves were reintroduced into Colorado, of course, those in rural area were not in favor of that, and they're losing livestock because of that. And now they're dealing with that after the fact, and it's causing a lot of turmoil, both financially and emotionally.
Yeah. So I feel like I have two, I do feel like Indiana is a little bit like the country where actually power is disproportionately held in the rural and small town areas. Indianapolis has very little power at the state legislature. If you want to organize and have power at the Capitol, you're not going to start in Indianapolis. So that dichotomy is true, but I would say the people that are representing rural and small town areas of Indiana are not in relationship with the bulk of the people and don't really represent what they want. So I'm not quite sure we have the same like urban-rural divide that plays out like that, but I don't feel like regular people are get heard at all. But I would say that's true in our urban areas too. I don't know if that helped. I wish we had ballot initiatives.
This person is asking, how do you navigate opposition to your initiatives from other community members, if you've faced any? Or does everything just sail through?
So
It's hard in a small
There-
town,
yeah,
everybody knows each other. I think.
yeah. My neighbor is my state rep. There was a way in which I learned, like, there's no shortcuts, there's no skipping, like, that you and my team are really trained to, like, you walk towards people, like, that orientation really matters. There's a lot of skepticism. There's been a lot of cynicism, a lot of, like, who are you? I think especially as a woman director, especially that lived elsewhere and moved back, that's a regular thing. I think, and I just don't think you can organize without hitting opposition. What we're trying to figure out is, like, how do we get the biggest amount of people with us possible? And then continue to, like, we do a lot of work, especially in small towns where it's like the mayor's your cousin, whatever, like, to actually figure out, like, how do we operate in public life together, and how is that different than how we operate in private life together? And in private life, we're friends, we have fun, we're there because we like each other, we love each other. In public life, actually, what we are there for is to do the work collectively together. So we have whole trainings we do about, like, what is public life, and what do we owe each other in it, and how do we operate inside of it?
This might be a good follow-up one. How do you balance all the needs with limited capacity, with people working and feeling spread too thin? How do you get people to show up to all those fun-looking meetings that you showed on the slide?
I had a whole meeting with one of our chapters recently it was maybe like a year ago, and I was just asking them, like, when do you choose staying at home on the couch, and when do you choose coming to a meeting? And, like, what are the things that make you choose to come out of the meeting? Because since COVID, like, just people's capacity to leave the house after 6 p.m. is low, and then they're also, like, managing 10 million other things. And that is where, like, it's a lot of follow-up. It's a lot of relational invitations. It's not flyers. It's not Facebook events. It's like, Dennis, are you coming to the meeting? Okay, cool. I'm going to check with you in 2 days and make sure you're going to come to the meeting. And also, will you bring some food? So, like, asking people to do things really matters. The part of that question was about balancing the needs. I think a lot of us come to organizing because we have, like, big soft hearts. At least my team does. I don't think there's an easy way to balance, like, how many people in our community are getting evicted or having, like, we've tried to put things in place where, like, when people go to court, we have people go with them. When we've had mutual aid funds that people can access, I try to, like, hold on to, like, the very clear fact that we cannot buy people out of poverty, and our commitment is to do long-term work and not be a charity organization. I do find it regularly devastating. And we've done our best, and sometimes we just can't help a lot of people.
Yeah. How do you get people to agree to not talk about federal level politics in your meetings? And how would you suggest that as a progressive, without people on the other sides feeling like you're pushing it? How do you avoid having people think you're pushing it on them? Do you think that model works for other contexts? And the person who wrote this says she or here is an organizer in Georgia.
Oh, cool. Happy for you to follow up on that question. Our membership consistently reinforces, like, we're an independent organization. We don't talk about the president. They like that. They like the capacity of being able to have a conversation about politics or resources that isn't the thing that's taking all the oxygen in the room. So it's actually the people on the polls that are resistant, the people that already have, like, a pretty formed political identity that want to talk about national politics all the time, but, like, most of our base doesn't. So that hasn't been, like, a huge, where we run into stuff is more cultural. Like, a lot of our membership wants to end with prayer. A lot are like, we have a bunch of secular people that's not resonant for them. So how do we combine those two things so you can have deeply meaningful expressions of your faith, and you can sit in the room as a non-believer and also have like a deep experience? So I think a lot of our things, it's less about like what's been driven online in terms of like just dividing us around national issues that aren't about our day-to-day lives. The things that we're up against more are a little bit more cultural. Like, how do we hold people together? Does the Georgia person want to say anything? Is that you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a mutual aid organizer in Athens, Georgia, and I run up a lot on the issue of people broadly agreeing when I suggest, like, we need more mutual aid in our community. But if I make it clear that I try not to make it clear that I'm a progressive, because a lot of times people, I know that will drive them away. But I'm curious how you've been able to cultivate that without feeling like you're pushing it on people, because I think it would work really well in my context in Georgia. But I think that if they hear it from me, they might not want it.
I don't even know if a bunch of our members have an orientation towards the word progressive. Like, it's not what they're thinking about. So that's one thing. But a lot of what we're talking about is power. And that we are pushing on people a little bit, right? Which is like, if you want change, you need power. How are we going to get you power? So we do have a methodology and orientation and an ideology that is like, everyday working people need more power. And we are like fervent about pushing that. And then like, actually we feel like the nationalization, the corporatization of our politics has sucked everything away from us so that you can't get the childcare you need. People are kind of down for that.
This person was curious about, what does membership mean for Hoosier Action? Do you have dues? How are decisions made? Are there elected officers and so forth?
We do have dues. They can be a quarter a month or $25 a month. It doesn't matter what you pay. Your membership is flat. Everybody's in. Membership sits inside of chapters, and those chapters decide what they're going to work on. We don't have elected bodies. I'd like to get somewhere closer to that, where we actually have a membership board that sits across all the chapters. Our moms organizer right now is building a table that includes membership from each chapter so that they can work on statewide campaigns and legislative campaigns. But everything is not elected. It's based on like how much power people are bringing in and their commitment to the organization.
One is about your role as an IPS a Wallace Rural Organizing Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, and what are you planning to do with that? And is part of it to share lessons from your experiences for other parts of the country?
Yes, that's why I was really excited about this fellowship. I feel like it takes a fair amount of catalytic energy to just like start up a thing. Organizing is hard, as many of you do it. And so I felt like, and also like you're running campaigns, you're kind of getting your ass kicked all the time. And so I've just been head down with my people, making mistakes and making gains and learning a whole bunch of stuff along the way. And so this was like the first moment I got to be like, what if you got to step back and think about, what have we learned about what is required to engage more people, particularly people who aren't politicized already? And then how could, I really believe in Southern Indiana, but I also believe that the problem that we're trying to work on is both a national and global problem of like, how do we reconnect with people who've been like really left behind in progress? And so I want to spend this time like both understanding what we've learned and then figuring out like, how can we equip more people to start more things at the local level that are broadly engaging people, particularly working class people.
Wonderful. I think I'll slip one last question in here. I'm getting kind of the word that we have to wrap up soon, but I think this is an interesting one. What role can local history play in organizing rural communities? For example, history of labor disputes and examples of people standing up to power with their communities in Appalachia, on the Rust Belt. I don't know if you're drawing anything from the history of your region in your organizing work for inspiration.
There's like a whole bunch of people in the organization that want to dig more into this. I have a lot of colleagues down home, North Carolina, and I they organize in rural parts of North Carolina, and I see that they really do draw upon like a legacy and a memory of civil rights activism there, that we don't have that memory in Indiana. We've never been like, we've had moments of, Eugene B. Debs is from Indiana, we've had moments of like, of activity. We fought back right to work for a very long time, but they're part of our history that we have to wrestle with too is like we were the rise of the Klan in the 20s. We were the home of the Klan. There's interesting things to lift up where my town was like one of the towns that passed an ordinance to ban the Klan, and the Klan in Indiana really was about appealing to working class people and giving to protect women and children and to be a part of something. It was a civic engagement process. So like we look at that as like a both like horrific model, but like it was an organizing model in our state. So we both are trying to like reckon with the legacy of like amazing leadership and hard work, and that we're a state that has a lot of, like all of our states, a lot of horrors in its past. And how do we bring both of those together to understand like we don't want to be nostalgic. We want to look forward together and figure out what is the future we can have towards a multiracial democracy in our state.
Fantastic. This has been such a rare opportunity to talk to someone like Kate, who's really grappling with all these questions and challenges on the ground. She gave a presentation to our staff the other day where, didn't you say that there's like, how many more times more organizers per capita in the Bay Area than in
Indiana?
75 to 3 or, you know, something like that. And it's such tough work, and she's clearly learned a lot, and I just really appreciate her sharing her lessons. And from the bevy, the proliferation of the questions from the audience, I can tell people really engaged. So thank you so much to all of you and to Kate.